So obviously it's come out in the media now that conveniently, when Francis Ngannou leaves the UFC, now what's his name, Dana White is he wants to make now crossover fights now. So before, he said it was just a one-off thing with Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather. He'll never think about doing it again. But now that Francis Ngannou has left the UFC, he wants to now conveniently come out and say that he wants Tyson Fury to fight Jon Jones in the UFC. I mean, if anyone with half a brain can see what's going on, it's so obvious. He feels slighted that Francis Ngannou has left the UFC, and now that he's gone, and he never got that super fight with Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou. And to be honest with you, as a fight fan, I'm kind of sad that fight never happened. Dana White is acting like jilted and thinking like, what can I do to frustrate Francis Ngannou, and what can I do to actually overshadow him? Did anyone notice that as soon as Francis Ngannou went to the PFL and he got his deal, Dana White started coming out with all this news to overshadow it? So he started talking about going to the UFC in Australia. He started mentioning new fights that were happening. He was doing everything in his power to overshadow the news that that Francis Ngannou actually signed to the PFL and the deal that he got. So with that in mind, I think it's obvious what's happening. Dana White has no intentions of making Jon Jones versus Tyson Fury in the UFC. And let's be real, Tyson Fury is not going to go into the UFC to fight Jon Jones. It's just not going to happen. And Dana White knows it's not going to happen. But the reason why he's putting this out there is just to overshadow and to frustrate Francis Ngannou. So the message he's trying to send to Francis Ngannou is, wow, when you was champion, you was here. I wasn't willing to make that fight. But now that you've gone, I'm willing to make that fight with Jon Jones. It's just so obvious what's going on. It's gaslighting. And Dana White, like, truth be told, like, without him, the UFC would not be where it's at, and because of the UFC not being where it's at, MMA would not be where it's at. Like, to some extent, he's invented the sport. When he got this, when he decided, he persuaded the Fertitta brothers to buy the UFC for $2 million, and then put another $45 million into it as a sunk cost, as it was hemorrhaging money as they're waiting for it to turn around. He is a major reason why MMA and the UFC is as big as it is. And let's be honest about it. Like, without him, this channel probably would not exist. Like, all these stars that we know about, all these great stars, the Khabibs, the Conor McGregors, the Jon Jones, Justin Gaethje, Michael Chandler, all these great fighters that have existed. Like, there's countless others that I forgot to name. They would not be in a position where they could be making money fighting. Like, we talk about fighters getting robbed in the UFC and not getting paid what they're worth, and that's true. They don't get paid what they're worth. They're getting paid way less than what they're worth. Like, even the top fighters like Conor McGregor, like, he literally made the UFC into $1 billion company. Don't get it twisted. Like, there was other fighters, and there was obviously Dana White is a massive reason why it became $1 billion company, but the major fighter that gave the most traction and the most mainstream attention to the UFC was Conor McGregor, and he never got compensated. Like, he gets like 30 to 50 to £100 million a fight, but that's nowhere near worth how much he should be compensated for doing what he did to the UFC. So every fighter is getting exploited in the UFC, but let's not get it twisted. Even though Dana White does exploit his fighters financially, it has to be said, if Dana White was not around, these fighters would not be getting paid at all, because to some extent, even though the sport existed before he came around, he's the one that popularized it and made it mainstream. Without him, these fighters will not be getting paid anything at all. So to some extent, he does deserve credit, and he's the huge reason why the sport has become what it's become. Like, we can't take that away from him. But truth be told, Dana White is the most petty, to some extent pathetic person in the UFC world. Like, just to see him talking down like to Francis Ngannou like this and going out of his way to like do this just shows his true character and what he is. Like, fair enough, the guy's left your promotion. It is what it is. Like, you decided to go your separate ways. Why can't you just make it amicable? Why do you have to do this? Like, the guy's left. It's over. It's finished. Like, that's what it is to you. And let's be real. Like, Francis Ngannou, man, if he would have fought Jon Jones and beaten him, then he probably would be up there as one of the one of the premier heavyweights that's ever lived. And truth be told, even with the legacy he's got now, he's probably a top 10 heavyweight in my opinion. Possibly not top 5, but let's be real, he's beaten a lot of great fighters, like Stipe and several other fighters. So he's a top legit legend out there. I don't understand why Dana White can, like, despite all the money that he's made and the success that he's got, he just cannot stop being petty. Like, it's just ridiculous. But you got to take the good with the bad, and you got to take the bad with the good. The fact is, like, even though the competitive spirit that he has, and the rage and the vengeful intensity he has, is what's propelled UFC into the global machine that it is, and that would not have happened if it wasn't for Dana White. So even though I don't like this side of him being petty and pathetic, to some extent it's what's needed to become like as successful as it is. Like, the reason why the UFC is successful is because Dana White has left an indelible mark on the sport. Like, he's made it what it is because of who he is. Like, if Scott Coker was in his position, I don't think the UFC would be this big. And Scott Coker's a more amicable guy who's more respectful to the fighters and such, but he doesn't have that intensity and the drive that Dana White has that propelled the UFC to become what it became. It became what it became because of Dana White. And don't get it twisted, there's loads of other factors in there, but he is the driving force that made the UFC what it is. The last 30 years, he's the one that's made the UFC what it is. But it's just this side of his personality is just it's hard to stomach and take. But truth be told, it's just who he is. And I wish there was like a way to mix both of them, but usually you can't. Like, have the ruthlessness and intensity and drive of Dana White, but also have the class of Scott Coker into one. Like, that would be perfect. But usually, like, when fighters are not getting exploited, the sport in a weird way suffers. Because, like, for example, boxing at the moment, don't get it twisted, we're getting loads of good fights at the moment, but there was a time where, to some extent, fighters were getting paid so much money that they could just duck and dive and not fight the best and not give the fans what they want. But then you got the other extreme where back in the 80s and 90s, fighters were getting exploited left, right and centre. But truth be told, we need to be honest about this. When Don King was on top of the world and he was one of the most biggest promoters, he was screwing over fighters left, right and centre. But truth be told, like, his cards were stacked. We used to get the best fights. We did used to get the best fights. Like, it's not... It's unfair to say it like that, but maybe fighters getting exploited is what makes good fights happen in a way, because underchanging and underpaying the fighters means that they're more likely to take a more competitive fight to make more money. But if they're already being overpaid for defenses and fights that they can win, then they're less likely to take risks and fight for that bigger purse. So I think there has to be a balance, but truth be told, I'm just being objective about both of it. Dana White's ruthlessness and ferocity is what's got him to this point, but it's also what can sometimes alienate fans. But okay, tell me what you think below. What do you think about what I just said? Do you think I've got a point, or do you think everything I said is nonsense? Tell me below, and like and subscribe to the channel. I've got a lot more content coming your way. Peace.